and a certain willingness really to say yes.
Gareth, you were a Tony winner.
Gareth Owen for Memphis the Musical.
Gareth Owen.
Gareth Owen for Come From Away.
Hey, my name's Gareth Owen. I've just won the Sound Design Award for Back to the Future the Musical.
Who would have thought a musical about singing cats would be a good idea? So I started pushing shows louder, more amplified. Amplification from one time was a dirty word. I've got lots of cool awards in my life, but an honorary doctorate was definitely one for my parents. Like, yeah, I'm sorry I dropped out of university 20 years ago. I know that you were really upset about it at the time, but look, hey, I made it up. Sometimes you spend days making something, only to have it cut just like that. That's just part of life. Water off a duck's back. Yeah, okay, fine. That's what happens. We're creating something together here that isn't just about sound. It's about the show as a whole.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's Zebra Spotlight podcast. I'm joined by Gareth Owen. Gareth is a multiple award-winning world-class sound designer with a prolific career spanning over 25 years. His work can be heard all over the world, including Broadway, Las Vegas, and London's West End. He's designed over 300 commercial productions with over 40 million people enjoying his sound design worldwide. Just some of his highlights include Cinderella, Prince of Egypt, Juliet, Bad Out of Hell, Joseph and the Technical Amazing Dreamcoat, Strictly Ballroom, Sister Act, Mamma Mia, MJ the Musical, and Beauty of the Beast. His latest production has caught the world's attention yet again. Back to the Future the Musical has won the Olivier Award for Best New Musical, 4 What's on Stage Awards, including Best New Musical, and the Broadway World Award for Best New Musical. Gareth, thank you so much for joining us today.
What an amazing introduction. I'm not sure how I feel about the 25 years in the business thing. That's a little bit disconcerting, to be honest. I still feel like I'm 21, so having been a sound designer for 25 years, that's a bit concerning, I have to be honest.
Well, you look like you're at the peak of your career. I mean, multiple awards, some of the best stage productions we've experienced. You've achieved a lot in 25 years.
I think I've achieved a lot by picking shows that I would enjoy watching, and I think getting to do shows like Back to the Future. I mean, I think my first understanding of what cool was when I saw Michael J. Fox on the movie screen holding on to the back of the pickup truck and riding the skateboard.
Absolutely, that is super cool.
I don't think up until that point in my life I understood what cool was. I think that was my first understanding of that. So yeah, getting to do the musical, and they talk about like MJ the Musical on Broadway. The first ever cassette tape that I ever bought was Michael Jackson's Thriller. So getting to do his music on the Broadway stage was just absolute dream come true. Absolutely
incredible. And we'll come on to discussing some of these highlights in due course. Where did it all begin? My parents are teachers, and one of my earliest memories is my dad. My dad was a maths teacher, really, but special needs teacher actually in the end. But he ended up looking after the lighting at the school that he taught at. One of my earliest memories was him up a ladder, focusing lights, and me sitting behind what at the time felt like this huge lighting desk, but was probably only about 12 faders. And him up the ladder, turn on number 7, son. That's kind of like, that's one of my earliest memories. And I always wanted to do stage lighting for a career, but my parents were very practical about it. They're like, no, get a proper job, and then you can do theatre as a hobby. I think they kind of wanted me to be a doctor or an accountant or something like that. And so that is, I was never really heading down the doctor or accountant route, but I was certainly heading down a route that was nothing to do with theatre. And then I I ended up doing, while I was towards the end of my school career, I ended up doing lighting in a local nightclub, and the club was sold to a guy, and this new guy wanted to do live sound. And he wanted to do bands, and he said to me, "Oh, can you sort out all the sound gear for the bands?" And I was like, "Yeah, totally, I can do that." And no idea. But he gave me a checkbook and said, "Just go and buy all the gear you need." So I went out and bought a book. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was called Live Sound, and it was a grey book with yellow text on the front. And I went out and bought this book, read this book about live sound. I was like, okay, right, made a shopping list of all the things I needed, and went out and bought it all: mixing desk, microphones, wedge monitors, amplifiers, a reverb unit, and so ended up mixing bands in this little local nightclub. And the good thing about it was that nobody knew what good sound was, which is good because neither did I. So I kind of had this opportunity to kind of learn and teach myself in a live environment, doing 4 or 5 different bands every night, and nobody there had a clue what it was supposed to sound like, which is good because I had no idea what it was supposed to sound like either. And then I was at university, and I'm still doing this at the weekends, but I'm also doing nightclub security as well. And I'm doing the security for the May Ball, and this big company from Birmingham called SSE, they came in to do the sound for the ball, and I got talking to their front of house engineer behind the mixing desk, and he said, I was talking to him. He said, "Oh yeah, next week we're coming back to Plymouth, where I was at university. We're doing this massive concert on the waterfront at Plymouth." So the next day, I phoned SSE and said I'd been speaking to this guy, and I told them I was doing a degree in acoustics, which was a complete lie. I was doing a degree in underwater science. I told them I was doing a degree in acoustics, and could I come and do work experience at this show? And they were like, "Yeah, absolutely, come along." So I came along, and I basically worked for the weekend on this show. And by the end of it, they left me in charge mixing the second stage. I ended up mixing this band, Katrina and the Waves, who had a really famous song called "Walking on Sunshine." And I ended up, they just left me in charge of this stage. And, at the end of the weekend, I called the office in Birmingham again, and they were like, "Yeah, really, yeah, you did really well. Do you want to come and do more work experience?" And I ended up spending the whole summer working for free. I mean, they got a really good deal out of it. And spent most of the summer working for free, but doing all these different festivals, Gatecrasher and Glastonbury, Reading, Leeds, all of these festivals. And then at the end of the summer, I still have one more year of university to do. And at the end of the summer, I went back to university, but kept doing work with them, sort of now getting paid. And then as the year went on, I was spending more and more time doing shows and less time at university. And eventually they said, "Do you want to go out and do this tour? I'm going to do this show." I ended up dropping out of university and going off and doing shows.
Wow.
And never really looked back. And then I was doing a New Year's Eve show in Alexandra Palace, and a really good friend of mine who was working on the show, he said, "Oh, I've just been offered a 6-month gig mixing Deep Purple." He said, but at the moment I'm mixing this West End musical called Blues Brothers." He said, "I know you like theatre, don't you? Could you cover me on this show, West End show, mixing this West End show, so I can go and do Deep Purple?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I ended up just suddenly overnight mixing a West End musical. Didn't follow any of the paths that the normal people do, where you sort of start at the bottom in musical theatre and work your way up. I kind of did all of that in rock and roll land, but then in theatre, I'm suddenly like head of sound on this West End show. And really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed not being tired. I really enjoyed not being completely exhausted from tour buses and load-ins and too much alcohol. And I really enjoyed just walking into a theatre where the sound system was already set up and mixing a show and then getting a decent night's sleep and then doing it again. And I realized I really enjoyed this. So I started doing more and more theatre. And as the years went on, I did less and less rock and roll, more and more theatre. I kind of climbed up the ranks through theatre. And then there's all sorts of pivotal moments within that theatre career where I can say, oh yeah, no, this was a key moment for that, and this was a key moment for that. But that's your question was, how did I get started?
Wow.
Well, yeah, it was a lot of good luck, a lot of being in the right place at the right time, and a certain willingness really to say yes when perhaps a more sensible human being may have done that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Is it a question of being sensible or having courage?
Or being very
well, look where we are now. That's all I can say. It's testament.
It's paid off. So, it could have gone very wrong.
Now, yeah, some of the journey you took, if you explain that nowadays to people, they'd probably think, how on earth do you even get to do that nowadays? That there wouldn't be any chance to do that. But going back then, some of the decisions you did make were very bold. So how did your family take it when you said, "No, I'm going to drop out of uni. This is what I want to do"?
Very badly. Yeah, very badly. They were not. I mean, my parents have always been very good at not dictating to me as to how to live my life, mainly because I've always been quite obstinate and always and I think they kind of realized quite early on that telling me what to do was probably going to achieve exactly the opposite of what they wanted. But they had a relatively traditional view of how life should be. You go to school, you get some GCSEs, you go get some A levels, you go to university, you get a degree, you get married, you have kids. A relatively traditional idea of how it should work. And for me, that just really was not on the cards at all, although I don't think any of us quite realized how much it wasn't going to be on the cards at the time. And I think they were very annoyed when I dropped out of university, but they did a really good job of hiding it. I mean, I knew, and they certainly knew, but they weren't as they didn't cut me off for life. You're banned, we don't want to see you again. There was some cross words, but they let it go. And the interesting thing is that this November, I'm getting a honorary degree from Salford.
Fantastic.
I'm getting an honorary doctorate from Salford University, which is the leading acoustics university probably in Europe. And my parents are coming to that. They're finally getting to come to the graduation that they didn't get to come to 20 years ago.
How fabulous is that? I mean, what an honor.
I must admit it was, I've got lots of cool awards in my life, but an honorary doctorate was definitely one for my parents. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry I dropped out of university 20 years ago. I know that you were really upset about it at the time, but look, hey, I made it up. Made it up, Mum. There you go. Here's the honorary doctorate 20 years later. So yeah, that's definitely one for them. That one.
I think that's a fascinating story, and it should inspire hope to a lot of young people out there who perhaps lost or have lost that sort of sense of direction, but they're passionate about something. And it's what you mentioned about hard work, persistence, and once you know, I guess what your purpose is, you just go for it and actually go out of your comfort zones to pursue excellence.
I mean, there's this fascinating theory. It's called the 10,000 hour theory. That says you don't get good at anything until you've put 10,000 hours into it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all sorts of good examples on this. That Bill Gates spent 10,000 hours in the computer labs when he was a kid learning how to program. That David Beckham spent 10,000 hours kicking a football around in the playground before he became good at football. The Beatles spent 10,000 hours working their way around German nightclubs and before they were discovered and became the Beatles. And when I was 21, I thought all I needed to do to be a good sound engineer was read all the manuals. You know, I had Midas XL4 manuals, and I knew what every button on the Midas XL4 did.
Wow.
So the Midas XL4 was the state-of-the-art mixing desk at the time. Huge thing, amazing, still an amazing bit of kit. You know, that if I knew how the speaker processors worked in Nexo Alpha speakers, that would mean I'd know how to make them sound good. And as time goes on, I realize I'm still learning stuff every day. Every day I'm discovering new things about sound. And I realized quite how ridiculously ignorant I was back then, and arrogant as well, to think that, you know, I could just do it. Having said that, if I hadn't have had that arrogance, I don't know if I'd have realized quite how much work it was going to be to get to where I am today. I'm not sure I would have done it back then, because I'm not sure my personality would have allowed me to. I'm not putting all of that effort into that. That's ridiculous. But my own innate arrogance at the time thought, yeah, I'm a brilliant sound engineer because I've read all the manuals, I've read all the books. Yeah, if I'd have realized the reality of that belief back then, I might have made some quite seriously different choices.
Now you mentioned pivotal moments in the past. So going back then, what would you say were maybe one or two highlights or pivotal moments that you thought, yep, you know what, this is where I need to be, and now I know I'm just going to build upon this, but you know, I've made it, this is where it's going to be?
I mean, I think pivotal moments in my theatre career really involve particular people at particular times. They're not particularly interesting eureka moments. It was doing a particular show with a particular person, and that person then asking me to do another show, and that opening new doors and raising the bar and putting me into new circles with new people. And I think there are a dozen or so key moments where I can say, I did that show, I met this person on that show, this person then asked me to do this show, which sort of raised the bar and raised the level and introduced me to a whole lot of new people. And I think certainly the most important key thing that I've learned through all of this is, you know, people talk about networking, people talk about, you know, networking sounds horribly corporate. It sounds like something salesmen do at trade shows. But relationships with people, trust, people trusting each other, people trusting you to do the job, trusting you to get a good result, they're the key things. I mean, I've seen a lot over the course of my career. I've seen a lot of really good sound engineers fall by the wayside because they can't get on with people in a group, because they can't deal with the politics. They don't have the diplomacy to be able to deal with difficult directors, difficult cast. You know, sound, there's a saying, everybody has two jobs, their own and sound. Everybody has an opinion when it comes to sound. Everyone has, you know, that people, you know, back in the day, it's a bit sexist to say it now, but back in the day, people used to talk about the bass player's girlfriend. And, you know, the bass player's girlfriend wasn't happy with the sound. So, you know, you have to deal with her opinion. And that's just a reality of the job. Everybody has an opinion about sound. And one of the skills I think that I've picked up over the years is to listen to everybody's opinion, to not discount it, to not kind of go, you're the bass player's girlfriend, I'm the sound engineer, just shut up. Just go, well, you know what? She's been in the rehearsal room with them for the last 6 weeks. I haven't. Maybe she knows something about how the show's supposed to sound that I don't. What's she got to say? You know, what does the producer and the venue owner and the writer and all of these other people who all have ideas about how everything should sound? Well, they may not be right, but let's take everything they have to say, put it in a pot, think about it, and then execute the stuff that makes sense in a way that makes sense and make them, and also make people feel like you're not just going, you know, I'm not interested in your opinion. I quite often see a world, particularly in theatre, but also in rock and roll, where music teams and sound teams don't appear to communicate or indeed have any sort of relationship. My feeling is I can't make something sound good if it's not good at source. And my feeling is that my relationship with the sound, my relationship with the music team needs to be, we need to finish the production, them asking me to be godfather to their newborn child. That's the kind of relationship we need to have in order to get a good result. Because if we don't do that, we're never going to get a show that sounds good.
You mentioned before there was an aspect of you that was sort of arrogant, and to, I guess, for the adrenaline rush to say yes to certain things and take up certain challenges. Where do you see, or were there moments in your career where that arrogance actually was curtailed and you had a very humbling moment? Because now, obviously, the things that you're saying are very sort of mentorship level and quite paternalistic and working, and as you mentioned before, the strength of relationship building. So would you say there's something along your career where things didn't go to plan, or you just thought, I've got a humble pie here, and let's just take a different approach?
I think that happens on an almost daily basis. I think you can find yourself standing there going, oh, I think that sounds quite good. And then somebody will appear at the mixing desk, and say, I don't think this particular bit sounds very good. What can you do about it? And long ago, I learned how to just take that, detach my ego, detach myself from that, not take it personally, and go, okay, do they have a point? Yeah, they probably do. Okay, yeah, let me see what I can do about that. Another great example is that, we do a lot of sound effects, and sometimes we'll spend days building beautifully complicated, detailed sound effect sequences, only for the director to just turn around and go, yeah, I don't think we really need that. Let's just cut that. And sort of early on in my career, I'd be like, what? Days on that? Come on, you said you wanted it, now you just cut it. And there was a time when I would have got really annoyed, maybe not with them, but really annoyed about it. And now I've just kind of go, yeah, it is what it is. Sometimes you spend days making something, only to have it cut just like that. And that's just part of life. And I've sort of learned to, water off a duck's back. Yeah, okay, fine. That's what happens. We're creating something together here that isn't just about sound. It's about the show as a whole. And you know what? That might be a really cool sound moment, but does the show actually need it? Does it actually make the show better, or is it just a distraction? And there's a sort of it's the Jurassic Park thing, which I find myself quite experiencing quite a lot. I think us sound designers are a bit like the engineers at Jurassic Park, in that sometimes we'll spend a long time doing something, but not actually stop to ask ourselves whether or not we should. And we'll get really attached to, hey, look, amazing, I created this really cool reverb moment. I created this really cool dinosaur. Yeah, but should I actually have created the dinosaur? Should I actually have created this really cool reverb moment? Is it actually the right thing for the world? Is it actually the right thing for the show? Yeah, probably not. Maybe we should not make killer dinosaurs, or indeed this massive reverb moment. And that's a pretty common thing, actually, that we're so busy congratulating ourselves on what we can do that we don't stop to ask ourselves whether or not we should.
Mm-hmm. Now, coming on to Back to the Future. So I think I came across this on an advert on Facebook, so the power of social media. And I thought, everyone's familiar with the movie, and I love the movie, and I watched the trailer, and I think even the sound effects in the trailer, it just captured me. I thought that how are they going to do Back to the Future on stage? I was really intrigued.
I think we were all thinking that when we were asked to do it. We were all kind of like, really? How are we going to do this thing?
Yeah, just get on with it. We'll do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Say another example of saying yes and then worrying about how you're going to do it later.
And so, so the trailer looked fabulous, and I just thought, I can't believe this is going to be a stage production. And part of me was, it was purely out of intrigue. I was definitely hooked on the trailer. But in fact, the magic actually, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't been. Everyone has to go and watch. If you're going to watch a musical in your lifetime, you've got to go and see this. But the magic actually starts from the moment you walk into the theatre. There's sudden lighting effects and some subtle sound effects already going on, and you know that this is going to be pretty spectacular. But I'm guessing that there's probably huge movie elements, or you may have drawn inspiration from movie makers before. But what sort of gems or pearls can you share with us for award-winning sound design when it comes to theatre? Because this was spectacular.
Well, I mean, I think part of the success of the sound design of Back to the Future was based on a director who was very, very willing to give us the rope. He was very willing to just let us, try things, to throw in sound effects and effects moments and all sorts of stuff, and just really willing to let us roll with it. So it ended up being sort of, your imagination's the limit, really. Where do you stop putting sound effects into things? And it became very movie Foley-esque in the way that almost, there's huge scenes in the show where almost every movement is accompanied by a sound effect. And, that got very complicated and very, very difficult to make work. But at the same time, the end result became, really something quite special. And, one of the really interesting things is that I was given access to the full original Pro Tools sessions. Of course, they weren't Pro Tools sessions. They were, it would have been done on tape at that point. And at some point, somebody would have exported it into Pro Tools from an archive point of view. I got given the Pro Tools sessions with all of the original sound effects in. So incredible. We didn't actually, with some small exceptions like the flux capacitor and actually the gull wing doors as well, the gull wing doors of the DeLorean, we kept the original sound effects from. Most of it, we used it as reference to rebuild modern versions of the car and all the other stuff. But it was absolutely fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating to hear actually quite how basic the sound effects were. But at the time, they would have been absolutely cutting edge. But they were actually quite basic when compared to modern sound effects design. But they would have been totally cutting edge at the time. When you listen to them in isolation, without dialogue and without Alan Silvestri's glorious score flowing over the top of them, it was all relatively here's a basic electrical effect, here is a basic thunder effect. There was no multiple layering, there was no one thunder effect here, another one here, spread out across a sound field. It was just like thunder, electric, but obviously so ridiculously effective when viewed as part of the whole. But when you dig into it, isolate out what they actually did, a lot simpler than I expected it to be, but absolute genius when viewed in the context of the final product. And it made me really think, maybe things don't need to be as complicated as involved as you think they do. Maybe it just matters what the end product is, because the end product of the original Back to the Future movie is borderline flawless, honestly.
it's one of the greatest movies ever made. Yeah, and I never noticed, even as a sound designer, even as a sound engineer, I'd never noticed that the sound effects are actually moderately basic when viewed in today's context. I'd never noticed that. It was only when I had the actual access to dig into it that I realized that. And yeah, there's a lesson for life in there somewhere, I think.
I think you're absolutely right, because it's I guess there's always a temptation to overdo things, but this was
The more time you get given, to do stuff, the more complicated and elaborate you'll make it. And sometimes just knowing when to stop, sometimes just knowing to go, yeah, okay, that's done. Take a step back. That's really, really hard for us. As creatives, nothing's ever done, nothing's ever finished. There just comes a moment when the movie's released. You have press night, that's it. You put on your suit, you have a glass of champagne, tell everyone how brilliant they are, and move on to the next project. There's that moment where you just have to go, okay, we're done now. But the temptation to keep playing and keep tweaking, keep adjusting, never goes. You just at some point have to sign off on it and move on.
And especially something like this, because it's to be clear for audiences who have not watched it, this is not a remake. This is not a reboot. If anything, it's probably the most wonderful tribute to the original film that exists, that you can experience. And that emotionally, certainly that's how I felt from some of the opening scenes. It really is like a pop-up book moment that if you've watched the film and you wanted to be sort of in the film, on the sets, but without the stage crew and the cameras and everything, and actually relive that experience. It's a very exhilarating, immersive moment, but it's quite difficult to explain unless you're actually there. You are actually in the movie. The set design is just incredible. That the performance is wonderful, and then when the sound and the lighting all comes together, it's a very emotive experience. Actually, I was in just for the opening scenes. I just had tears flooding. I thought, this is just how have they nailed it?
I mean, a huge amount of the credit to that has got to go to Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis, who were the original creators of the movie. Particularly Bob Gale was in the theatre, all the time, and he'd come up to the sound desk and he'd say, that ticking of the watch sound you've got there, it's not really the right ticking of the watch sound. It was more tick 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 tick. We'd be like, oh yeah, great, okay, great, Bob. And he drove the designers crazy with like, that sign up there that says "Go Bulldogs Go." 87. Well, there should be a comma before the 87 because the sign on the park bench needs to change when they go from 1980 to 1955, and it needs to change like this. And you've put the horse logo on it. The horse logo should be on the left, not on the right. Just driving them mad with set decoration details but the end result is something that is a truly honors the original movie. And I think it's that attention to detail from the writers and the directors, plus getting to sit in a room with Alan Silvestri, after he's just won his Oscar for, he's still, the amazing thing about Alan Silvestri is that he was considered to be one of the great movie composers when Back to the Future was made. But then he's just won an Oscar for Avengers Endgame. The biggest classic movie of all time, and he's and there he is sitting in a theatre with me in Manchester when we originally created the show, sitting in a theatre, discussing the balance of the violins versus the balance of the cellos. I'm sitting there thinking, surely you've got better things to do than be worrying about this, Alan. You're like the god of modern movie music, and you're sitting here discussing with me whether there's too much low end in the timpanis or not. And absolutely fascinating people to work with. Really, really fascinating people to work with. And I felt truly honored, honestly, to be in a room with these people. And
I think that's been one of the
Mhm.
great things as my career has progressed. About, you know, the higher you get up the ladder, the cooler the people you get to work with. You know, the more of your childhood legends that
Incredible.
you get to hang out with. You know, I've ended up being really good friends. I've done a couple of shows recently with the guys from Bon Jovi on a ghetto blast, watching the sun go down. You know, that's some of the. You know, I'm not somebody who's particularly impressed by celebrity, and I'm not particularly prone to hero worship. But getting to become actual friends, you know, I've actually become really good friends with Bob Gale. You know, he sent me an email just yesterday with links to a Korean orchestra that play music out of sound effects, and a Honda advert that made music out of the revs of a car. He sent me this yesterday. Hey, came across this, thought you'd find it really interesting. I'm like, this is Bob Gale. Surely you have more important things to do than send me links about Honda car adverts. And I think that's been one of the really nice things about my career, is that I've ended up becoming friends with people that are really, really interesting. I've got to spend real quality time with really, really interesting human beings. And that's definitely been an unforeseen, but, you know, truly glorious benefit of some of the projects I've done.
And again, I think it's testament to hard work, passion, and relationship building that in fact there's lots of rewards in this, but it's that maintaining the humility and just passion for producing excellence that brings together these genuine friendships. And I think that's absolutely fabulous.
It is, and trying to juggle that with having a wife and 3 kids and traveling all over the world. It's quite an epic challenge, and I relish every moment of it. But I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that some days I just wake up feeling completely exhausted and thinking, I need a holiday. But of course, holiday with 3 kids is never a holiday, is it? That more tired than when you left.
And I mean, that's the reality of the situation. You know, we get to a certain age, and a vast majority of us at some point in relationships, we have children, we've got families. And now you're traveling, you know, all over the place. It was challenging to get hold of you in a particular time zone where it would work. So you've just come back from Las Vegas. You're here for a short while, and now you're off to Vienna. How do you balance sort of family life with doing so many stage productions and traveling all over the world?
I mean, I think my wife is probably a saint. You know, I don't think the Catholic Church has realized it yet, but I think she's probably a saint. I think I work very hard at being present when I am present, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. It's not always easy to achieve, but when I am home, I'm probably home for a bit less than half the year. But when I am home, I work really hard at trying to be a real, you know, I work really hard at trying to be a good dad. I work really hard at trying to be a good husband. It doesn't always work, but that's what I try to do. We do a lot of holidays. I've almost come to think of the cost of holidays as being a business expense, because it's almost what allows us, to some degree, it allows us to go, okay, I'm going away for 3 weeks, but don't worry, when I get back, we're all going to Mexico for 3 weeks. And it sort of gives my wife and I something to look forward to. Mm-hmm. That we do a lot of holidays, and that is sort of our thing to, yeah, okay, I'm going to be at home on my own with the kids for 3 weeks. Okay, Gareth's going to New York. I mean, the longest stint I was away for last year, I was away for 2 months last year. But my wife knew that when I got back, we had big plans and we were going to do cool things. And also, the way the financial side of theatre works, if you create a successful show, you keep getting paid for that. So you're not, unlike a lot of live sound engineering, a lot of sound engineering full stop, you aren't just paid for your time doing a job. You are one of the you're one of the creatives, so you own part of the intellectual property of the production, which means that you continue to financially benefit as long as that show runs. So there's a sort of thing where you go to work for 3 months, but then I come back and we go on holiday and I'm still earning money. I'm earning money the whole day.
Fabulous.
So my wife's very pragmatic about all of this. She understands how it works, but I am sometimes quite surprised that it works as well as it does so far, at least.
You're doing a great job so far, I'm sure. Now, obviously, your parents were academics, and they wanted you to become an accountant or a doctor, and you're looking at someone who probably had similar influences. And I did become a doctor, and now I should become a filmmaker, but that's a different story. For your kids, how much influence sort of do you have? Are they interested in following dad's footsteps, or what's the story there?
I mean, there's this sort of running thing with all of us grown-ups who work in theatre that, God, no, absolutely wouldn't want your kids to do this. And I actually think I continue to believe that, really, especially as performers. I honestly don't know how performers do what they do. It is such an insecure lifestyle that, even when they've got a show, they're worrying about where the next show is coming from. The audition process, oh my God, it's horrible. I could never do that. I don't have the strength of personality to go through that. And I really, really wouldn't want that for my children. Having said that, the number of people that I know who, I don't want my kids to go into theatre, I don't want my kids to go into performing, and then they end up going into performing anyway. It's difficult for kids not to see the glamour and not to see the excitement and not to see all the good things about, in their parents' lifestyle. I think in that respect, I really don't want my kids to follow in my footsteps, because for every one of me that makes it, there's hundreds of thousands who don't, and I've been really lucky, and I don't want them to. Honestly, I don't want them to have to deal with everything that I had to deal with to get here. I think I have an advantage to some degree in that our home is Amsterdam, and I don't really work in Amsterdam. So unlike a lot of parents who work in theatre who live in London or live in New York, who, their kids have been coming into the theatre to see them at work, on a daily basis, have been to all sorts of different shows. My kids have actually had relatively little exposure to my working life. Because because we live in a country that isn't a place where I really do shows, they aren't exposed to it on a daily basis. They aren't exposed to it even on a weekly or monthly basis a lot of the time. Obviously they come away to places when I work, they come to New York, but they've seen 10 minutes of Michael Jackson on Broadway, and that's it for the number of for the shows of mine that they've seen. That might actually be it. My oldest son's 8 years old, and they've popped into rehearsals a bit. I think when it actually comes to shows in front of an audience, they've maybe seen the last 15 minutes of MJ on Broadway. That might be it. They've been to musical theatre shows, but yeah, they don't have a huge amount of exposure to my life, which I think is probably a good thing in the long run, honestly.
Now, moving sort of into the future, are there what sort of projects are you allowed to disclose that we could be looking forward to in the next few months, and particularly, are there any dream projects you'd love to do that haven't been invented yet?
I mean, at the moment, it seems to me that a lot of the stuff that I'm working on over the next year is recreations of shows we've already made, but in different territories. So, for example, we created Back to the Future in London, but we actually created it in Manchester and then took it to London. But we are opening it on Broadway this year, next year. And the same with Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella. We're opening that in New York very early next year. MJ, the Broadway musical, is going out on a US tour next year. And Juliet, which is a show that we created in London, is opening on Broadway. It's actually loading into the theatre as we speak. So it feels to me like a lot of what I'm doing over the next year is the same shows again, but in different territories. I am doing some new shows in the next year, but feels like there's a lot of recreation over the next. And that's good, really, because we put all this effort into making these shows in the first place. It's nice that they've become a success and are wanted. And we're doing both Joseph and Juliet and Rocky Horror in Australia in the next year. So it's really nice that these shows are getting a future and getting out there and being seen by more people. So yeah, that's what it feels like I'm doing a lot of at the moment.
I think in the list of shows before, I think A Bronx Tale was in Broadway.
That's right, yeah.
And I'm unless I'm wrong, but I don't think that's been performed here in the UK.
No, I think A Bronx Tale is not a movie that is well known outside of America. I mean, you've heard of it, but you're De
Niro.
It's De Niro. It's not. I think if you do a survey today while you're walking around your life, you say, "You watch Bronx Tale?" I'm going to guess that most people will say, "No, was that a De Niro movie? Maybe." I have no idea. In America, particularly in New York, it is a very, very popular movie with a certain New Jersey, upstate New York demographic. And that made it a success for a while in New York. It was not a long-term running success. It was not a rollout around the world show, but it was a good show. And the people who it appealed to loved it, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
I think there was a hope that it was going to be the New Jersey Boys, but it didn't have that breadth of appeal. But you've got to do. One part of what I always say is, I make new musicals for a living. You've got to do a lot of shows before you get to do for every Back to the Future, for every MJ the musical you do, there's a lot of shows that you put a lot of work into, and they don't become. MJ's the third highest grossing show on Broadway at the moment, behind Hamilton and Lion King. It's outgrossing Wicked. You have to do a lot of shows that don't become that before you get to do the show that does become that, if you see what I mean.
And what would you love to be part of or see on stage that hasn't been done yet? Have you any dreams that, that would be awesome in the theatre?
I mean, there are shows that have already happened that I wish I'd got to do. I always listen to the soundtrack for Wicked and think, wow, I would have loved to have done this. There's the Wicked movie coming out quite soon, which is in production at the moment. I listen to shows like that and think, wow, I would have loved to have done the sound for this. There was a musical on Broadway called Rock of Ages, which was all 80s hair music, hair rock. I'd have loved to have done that. I'd have loved to have done School of Rock, actually, that Andrew Andrew's only really kind of had three long-term sound designers in his life. Martin Levan, who basically created, in my opinion, created the art of sound design with the help of Andrew Lloyd Webber. I think Andrew Lloyd Webber gave him a huge amount of resources to try things out, and as a result, Martin created all sorts of things that we do without even thinking about it today. Like the idea of putting microphones on people's heads. Yeah, that was Martin Levan's idea. And then after him, there was Mick Potter. Mick Potter, in my opinion, is one of the greatest sound designers ever. And then Mick is sort of semi-retired now, and I've ended up doing Andrew Lloyd Webber's shows. But it's School of Rock was kind of the last new musical that Mick did for Andrew. And I've always been a little bit disappointed that transition didn't happen a little bit sooner, and Mick didn't decide to retire a bit, so I could have done School of Rock. Yeah, I mean, and then when it comes to ideas, I think if I knew what those things were, I'd be a theatre producer and I'd be producing them myself. I don't know what the next big new musical is. What I do know is it's never the things I expect it to be. I mean, who would have thought a musical about singing cats would be a good idea, or a musical about people pretending to be trains while wearing roller skates would be a good idea, or a musical about Ava Peron or Jesus Christ or Alexander Hamilton, with rap. Who would have thought? I mean, you look at the shows that are a hit out there. I mean, obviously there are some that you kind of go, oh yeah, I suppose that's pretty obvious. Who on earth thought? Who ever thought that you could do a stage musical of Lion King and it actually be a good idea? It's lions talking to each other and singing songs. Come on, how can that possibly be a good idea? And yet it's maybe the most successful musical ever, and it's super.
Quite true. Quite true.
I am constantly amazed that if you looked at a show based on logic, almost none of the most successful musicals of all time, you'd go, that was obviously going to be a hit. A lot of them are really, really weird ideas, and yet end up being absolutely superb.
Quite true. And Back to the Future being just a wonderful example. I had so many people on my Facebook going, oh, was it any good? And I said, listen, if you love the film, this will just blow your mind. I can't just go and see it. It is incredible.
As we talked about right at the beginning of this, the idea of doing Back to the Future as a musical, I mean, that's somewhere between terrible idea and really terrible idea. But yet it is absolutely superb. I say that myself. I can only take a small part of the credit for it being absolutely superb. But on paper, it sounds like a terrible idea.
Now you're I keep being distracted by your amazing quiff, and I'm just thinking, if there's ever an Elvis production, you've got to do it.
Yeah, this is my stumble out of bed, grab a quick breakfast, and then think, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be on camera in 20 minutes.
Now, obviously, I'm coming from audiovisual enthusiast. I love movies. What are some of your influences from the world of movies or music? I mean, what are some of your favorite film titles, TV dramas, music, just for the interest of people listening?
Well, I mean, look, anyone is sort of in their early 40s who, I mean, Top Gun, one of the greatest movies of all time. The new Top Gun Maverick movie. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I watched it in IMAX the day it was released, and just sat there with the biggest grin on my face from the first chime at the beginning to the opening carrier scene. Everything about it absolutely jaw-dropping. At the risk of continuing to trot out, hugely successful product, the new Stranger Things. When you all look at sound design, I mean, there's an episode of Stranger Things, season 4, called Massacre at Hawkins Lab. And if you want to see a masterclass in television sound design, oh my God. I mean, I watched it in my home cinema with my wife was out for the evening, so that actually meant I got to turn it up, which doesn't happen very often. And I watched it with the lights off, and it's scary.
It's very freaky.
I mean, and it wasn't the visuals that were terrifying; it was the sound design.
Sound design,
and the absolutely jaw-droppingly incredible sound design. Really, really impressive. I mean, from a favorite movies point of view, well, I'm going to trot out all the old staples. There's a movie called Leon that I absolutely love.
Classic.
Almost anything by Luc, or certainly any of Luc Besson's early stuff. Le Grand Bleu, the Deep Blue was absolutely well. But then things like Heat, Usual Suspects, Jaws. I mean, come on, how can you not be in love with Jaws as a movie? I think I don't have a huge amount of off-piste indie movies in my greatest movies of all time collection. It is a lot of the great works by the great commercial movie makers, Spielberg and Luc Besson, people like that. Not as off-piste as you might perhaps think. I'm currently watching Game of Thrones, House of Dragon, and again, it's a visual and sonic masterpiece, and a storytelling masterpiece as well. I mean, Game of Thrones as a whole is a storytelling masterpiece. It's based on the War of the Roses, so it's not exactly an original story, but it's War of the Roses with dragons and demons, and obviously a rather contentious final episode of the main series, which I think if everyone could go back and rewrite at this point, they probably would. But I'm watching House of Dragon at the moment, and it's superb. Really enjoying it.
So some great recommendations there, but yes, certainly Maverick for me last year was so early this year. What was the cinematic? I mean, I thought Dune blew my mind, and then.
So my mum's always been a big fan of the Dune books. I've never got into them. It's a series that you would expect me to have read incessantly from one end to another. It's certainly, I've read a lot of that genre and a lot of that type of stuff incessantly. But for whatever reason, I have never managed to get into the Dune books. And I watched the Dune movie, and obviously, sonic and visual masterpiece. But it's engaged with me, and I don't really know why. Everything about it should. I'm a massive sci-fi fan, and it should engage with me, but for some reason it doesn't. Having said that, the new Star Trek series, which I'm just trying to remember what it's called, something worlds, altered worlds. No, it might be called Strange New Worlds. That's probably what it's called. Star Trek Strange New Worlds. That's a really, you talk about Back to the Future being a good homage to the original. Strange New Worlds has this wonderful, as so often with modern remakes of Star Trek and Star Wars. Well, actually, no, new remakes of Star Trek, they try to modernize the technology. Whereas with Strange New Worlds, they've got this wonderful homogenization between the original Kirk era technology in the set construction, combined with sort of modern touches that make it believable. And it's really smart. Unlike Star Wars, where, like, if you watch the current Obi-Wan Kenobi series, the technology in it is exactly the same as the technology would have been in original Star Trek. And to me, I get the homage to that. I get that they are
trying to keep it in the same universe, in the same world. But I struggle with it sometimes, when they walk up to a spaceship that can fly at hypersonic speed, and there's a panel with 4 red buttons, and kind of like, yeah, I get this is what it was like when this movie was made in the 70s, but does it really fly now? Whereas Star Trek Strange New World have managed to hit a balance in production design where they pay tribute to the original Kirk era designs while still making you feel like you're watching something that could be set in the future. There's a tangent for you.
There we go.
Sound design to props design on Star Trek and Star Wars.
And before I let you go, you mentioned about your home cinema. So this is an audiovisual audience predominantly. Tell us about your home theatre setup.
So my home theatre setup is somewhat influenced by how much. So when we first moved into our house, I had an area quite clearly set up in mind that was going to be the home cinema, and my wife quite clearly had the idea that was going to be the lounge. And
that old chestnut.
Yeah. The interesting thing about it, though, is that as time's gone on, she has rather accepted that it's a movie theatre, not a lounge, and sort of allowed me to kind of do what I want with it, which is good, really, because she makes most of the decisions about most of our home life. So it's nice for me to have my little corner. I've got my office, I've got my workshop, and got my little home cinema. But yeah, it's Dolby Atmos system. It's driven by I can't remember model numbers, but it's driven by a Yamaha decoder. I want to say it's something like 1050 something or other, but it's external D&B power amps. D&B being a manufacturer that does live sound, but I've got good contacts with them, so I was able to get speakers and amplifiers at good prices. So I've got front, left and right, then dual centers, stereo subs, and then I've got 4 speakers on stands around the lower level, providing sides and rears, and 4 speakers. Actually, that was something that we built our house from scratch, and I managed to get the cables for the overhead speakers into the roof before, with the intention of doing exactly that. And then that's coupled to a Sony Blu-ray player, Apple TV, and a Synology Plex media server. And I have to say that 99 times out of 100, I'm watching content via the 4K Apple TV, Netflix, or the Plex server. There are some movies like Top Gun Maverick that I ordered on 4K HD.
Absolutely, yeah.
HD Blu-ray, and actually it still hasn't arrived. I think it probably is waiting for me when I get home. And that I will, of course, choose to watch on Blu-ray, but it's one of those things. I always used to think, I should only listen to music on CD because that's the purest way to do it. And the reality was, it just meant I didn't listen to music. And then as soon as I embraced the MP3 generation and kind of went, okay, but listening to music at a lower quality is better than not listening to music. And then I sort of never looked back. It's slightly the same with movies and TV. I used to.
I guess it's a cultural shift. Which speakers have you got in there?
So it's all D&B speakers.
D&B speakers.
It's all the D&B dedicated, which is not. I can't imagine. There's almost any D&B home cinemas in the world, because it's not really designed to do that. B, it's quite ludicrously expensive, but it's all the same speaker systems, same speaker technology, same speakers and amplifiers that I use in the theatre. So yeah, it just, I have good contacts with
with those people are able to buy really good stuff at really good prices. And it, I mean, don't get me wrong, it sounds like, I mean, I'm really proud of it. It sounds absolutely fantastic, but it's not a traditional, system at all. But yeah, it sounds amazing.
And it's really, really, I'm not at all surprised that you have your own movie theatre and full Dolby Atmos setup for what you do. And I think it just goes hand in hand that, you know, the productions you're involved with are cinematic productions, and that's what people expect nowadays. And, you know, technology, you're constantly pushing the boundaries. So the experience in the theatre is simply exhilarating. It's almost like IMAX, but with real people around you. You know, if and when you're in the UK again, I'd love to invite you around to come to mine or some of the other demo rooms that we've got access to.
I'm absolutely fascinated. The only problem is I'd end up spending a load of money. That would be
no. It'd be get to feedback from the experts and the people who make, you know, creatives with passion. So I spend a lot of time inviting artists here just to come and enjoy experiences, watch their music videos, listen to their unreleased album tracks. So here,
I think to some degree, theatre sound designers owe people like you a debt of gratitude, because when I first started working in theatre sound design, there was this expectation that everything was hidden and everything was invisible. So you didn't see microphones, you didn't see speakers. All the sound was supposed to come out of the orchestra pit and off the stage, and amplification was a dirty word. We tried to hide the very existence of it. And at some point, and I think I can take an element of credit for being a leader in this, although Mick Potter, who I mentioned earlier, was also sort of on the forefront of this sort of realization that, you know, people have iPods, people have iPhones, people have Beats headphones, people have 5.1 surround sounds in their sound systems in their front rooms. You know, the cheapest of which at the time you could pick up in Dixon's or Curry's for $100. You know, 17 speaker systems in their cars, that when you go to the movie theatre and, you know, you're in the middle of the battle at Braveheart, the orchestra sweeping around you, the clash of swords is coming from all directions, spaceship flies over the top and your guts rumble. You know, all of that was instrumental in evolving audience's perception of what sound was and sound is. And then in theatre, we were still pretending like there's no sound, pretending like, you know, oh, it's all invisible. And I kind of had a sort of a bit of a revelation one day where I went, you know what, I might be what theatre world thinks it wants, but I don't think it's what the audience wants. And I kind of went right out on a limb, honestly, and kind of went, well, I'm going to make cinematic sound design.
That's exactly what you've done.
I'm not necessarily going to tell everyone that this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start doing it and see what happens. So I started pushing shows louder and more amplified. Amplification for a long time was a dirty word. And then it sort of evolved into the term Disneyfication, where, you know, sound designers would sit around derisively talking about how shows had become Disneyfied, and that you know, it took me a while to work out what they even meant. But, you know, Disneyfication is the cinematic evolution of musical theatre sound. And I'm like, well, I know that you mean this in a derogatory manner, but this is absolutely what I want to do. More to the point, it's absolutely what I think the audiences want as well. And this gamble, this going out on this limb, this deciding this is what I was going to do and being at the forefront of it has totally paid off, because it turns out I was right. It turns out that is what audiences want. And the theatre industry as a whole is coming around to that idea, that even on your classic book musical, even on your Guys and Dolls, your 42nd Streets, your Kiss Me Kates, people think they want invisible amplification, but what they actually want is to be swept away by the music. Absolutely. They want to be enveloped in the music. They want to feel the music. They want the music and singing to become, you know, a visceral experience, not just well, I can hear her singing on stage and I can hear the orchestra coming out of the pit. And I'm to some degree taking pleasure in watching theatre sound evolve in that direction, and knowing that while I'm not necessarily sure I can take credit for creating it, I think, you know, other people were doing that sort of thing. I think I can take credit for being the person who has unashamedly pushed it to the forefront and unashamedly shoved it down audiences' throats, I guess.
And we love it, and that is the reason why I contacted you, because the audio design and the experience blew my mind. And I just thought, this is the movie that's just popped out of the screen right in front of you. And it's just, I can't express how much people need to go and watch it, because it really is sensational. I was just reading something else about your profile, totally different to stage production, but sound designing for theme parks and other sort of spaces.
Yeah, I mean, theme parks is something that it's quite difficult to talk about, because when it comes to theme parks, we are a lot more non-disclosure agreements. You know, there's the whole Disney Imagineer thing that, you know, you're not really allowed to talk about it at all. I mean, to be honest, Disney aren't a big fan of you talking about the how you go about doing the sound for their stage productions, but they're, you know, they and other theme parks of their ilk are very protective about discussing what it is that you do for theme parks. I mean, interestingly, I feel like theme park audio is still a million miles away from what could. It is only just beginning to catch up with these sorts of immersive experience. I took my oldest son to the Spy Experience in New York recently, and it was like, okay, yeah, this is coming on. They're actually using, you know, highly directional speakers and you know, lots of multi-channel audio, but so often in theme park design, sound is merely functional. Please hold on to the railings. Please don't stick your hand.
For announcements.
You know, some evil cackling and spooky noises. Sound, and you're like, yeah, this is rudimentary at best. And I think there's still a long way to go on that. There's still a long way to go to bring theme park sound design up to the level that other disciplines are doing. That's not to say there isn't great theme park sound design out there, but often it feels to me like sound on a roller coaster is a distant cousin to of the roller coaster. You know, smoke and water spray and flashing lights. I've never been, and I quite like roller coasters, so I go on roller coasters whenever the opportunity presents itself. I've never been on, say, a roller coaster that has a fully integrated sound design. You know, even things like the black hole at Disney World, you would think, if there was ever going to be a roller coaster that, you know, because you're basically removing sight from the equation, you'd think sound. And it's not to say they don't do sound, but feel like there's so much you can do that hasn't been explored in art design, or if it has, it's only in the very newest of rides. Yeah, I think there's some fascinating opportunities to explore there.
Interesting. So yeah, I think give it some time, and the whole 4D element, they're missing that dimension, and hopefully once that's in, it'll just change the, you know, it's got to be something much more exciting than listening to the chains and the track.
Yeah, there's definitely a world where you could do something really interesting with that I've just not seen explored at this point in time. Maybe that I've not been on the right rides.
Unless you're missing the little enchanting children's rides where you go on the little boat thing through a cave thing. Those things are quite good fun for sound.
Yeah, and they, you know, I've done those with my kids, but again, I can think of a lot of sonic experiences in my life where I've impressed. I can't ever think of a theme park ride where I've gone, oh, yeah. I mean, you know, here we are in the Magic Kingdom singing, you know, some elves are singing a song. Yeah, I mean, it's generally pretty bad audio quality, pretty bad synchronizations. Yeah, and nothing particularly creative or mind-blowing about it. As I say, I don't consider myself to be a theme park expert, so there could be a whole world of theme park adventures that I've missed in all of this. All I can do is talk from my current experience and say I've not ever really seen anything in a theme park that I've been impressed by.
Well, I think as an expert in the entertainment industry, you know, if anyone's designing a new theme park or they get into that stage, that they really need to consult you just to make sure that they give the audience what they want, because you clearly know what the audience wants.
Absolutely.
So, as I said, the invitation to come and experience my humble Dolby Atmos setup here. So I'm using M&K speakers and a 9.2.4 array, and then we've got the Steinway system for music. So whenever you're in the UK, you're warmly invited to come and experience that here or anywhere else where you're free to attend. So I look forward to having that meeting at some point.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
And I wish you all the very best in your future productions this year and next year, and that your family get to enjoy time with you on holidays and some of your productions, and absolutely all the best on your doctorate. Congratulations on that for next month, and I think your parents will be suitably proud of what you've achieved.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Really nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Likewise, and we'll be in touch. All the best.